Art is a creation of the eye and of the mind's eye. But what happens when the artist has a visual impairment? How does that affect the images that he creates? I'm Barbara Cohenauer. Stay tuned as Focus on Art goes to Philbrook Museum for Art of the Eye. This morning at Philbrook Museum, we are a little bit vision impaired as we tape this program. We had a big storm last night and the power's not quite up to its usual standards. So if we're just a tiny bit dark, it kind of really sets the stage for the show. Our guest today is Scott Nelson. Scott, welcome to Focus on Art.
Hello.
We appreciate your being here. Scott's the curator that put this show together, brought it to Philbrook, and he's also an artist who's participating in the show. So Scott, let's begin first of all and talk about what was your basic theme when you put this together? What are you trying to accomplish?
Well, oftentimes we do things because we don't like what's going on out there in the world, and I didn't like the flavor of the handicap art exhibition that, though it demonstrates the very fine compensatory skills of artists with disabilities, it did not provide any new learning experiences about living with a disability. And so around the time that I was diagnosed having retinitis pigmentosa at the age of 25, I was already a very active working professional artist, and I was very concerned about its effect on my production and on my career as an artist. And at the same time, I was learning that several masters from art history were known to have had vision impairments, like Claude Monet, and while under the influence of cataracts had perhaps made his greatest contributions to art history, and I thought, this is awfully fascinating. And at the same time, I was noticing that in my own mind, my brain was beginning to present imagery that may not have been true, but it was so fascinating. It was beginning to like fill in the missing picture. It was presenting ghost images, and I was also developing this uncanny ability of formulating objects in my mind's eye and being able to turn them around much like a computer-aided drafting machine can do these days. So I was saying, my gosh, I mean, even though my vision is getting smaller and smaller and it's more and more restricted, that there was a greater incidence of interior vision phenomena stuff going on, and to a visual artist, this is awfully, awfully fascinating.
Absolutely.
Friends of mine were saying, hey, Scott, you're legally blind, you have a restricted visual field of less than 20 degrees, which is one of the illegal parameters of blindness. And it was hard to explain. And so I made this sculpture. I made a sculpture similar to this. This is my contribution to an understanding of tunnel vision, which is one of the characteristics of my having retinitis pigmentosa. I have Usher syndrome, which means I have an associated hearing loss. Okay. I wear contact lenses and I wear a hearing aid. And so what I did with this sighting instrument here is to give you the opportunity to look through these two view tubes. There are some slots along the side, and they indicate a strong sensation of light coming in from the periphery, although I can't really discern what's happening out there. And you put your eyes up here and you look through, and what you get is a small restricted field about this large, but you also understand several other things. And that is that the field of vision goes out in the shape of a cone, so that maybe 1,000 yards away, my field is much, much wider. Okay. Helps me to ride a bicycle on city streets. Uh-huh. And then also through a process of scanning and tracking, it's like I take lots of little separate photographs and tape them together like a panoramic view, and it's my visual memory that really plays an integral part of tying this all together to give me a sensation of sight and life that seems normal and not restricted.
All right, can I step up here and take a look through your sculpture?
Sure you can.
All right, and so exactly what I'm going to see through here is very much the kind of image that you would see.
Well, about how limited, how restricted, how tight, how small the field of vision is. I do not have peripheral vision out on the sides.
One thing that's interesting, though, is since it's very compact, you really pay attention to what is in that very small sphere. It's almost like kind of a focusing of attention.
It does. You know, Barbara, it explains why when I was age 25 and told that I had this problem, that I was already legally blind, that's going from 180 degrees peripheral field down to 20, that I hadn't thought, I didn't think I had a serious problem. I knew I had trouble driving at night. I had night blindness. That's one of the characteristics. But it was because I was an artist. It was because I was always looking for favored objects out there and making mental compositions that I thought that that's why I really simply favored, or had a propensity for zeroing in on things and for just kind of obliterating everything else that might interfere with the visual pleasure that I was gaining from that focused item.
Wonderful. Well, now when you put this show together, are all the works in the show created by artists who have visual impairments? Most
of them are. We did a public service announcement through ophthalmic journals and arts magazines, radio talking book stations, social service agencies, so that about 100 artists heard about the opportunities. And then there was a calls for artists. The criteria being that the artist would have a condition or an impairment, it did not have to be legally blind though, that somehow influenced their artwork or altered their perceptions or forced changes in work methodology. Right. So a jury panel of an art historian and a couple of art curators, both public and corporate, and an ophthalmologist, reviewed the works of over 100 artists and selected 20 of the artists, most of them with vision impairments and very significant ones, and representing impairments that cause blindness all across America. And then I included a work of my own and invited 3 other artists, and we'll visit those artists later this morning.
Okay, well, why don't we start visiting over here with the photographs on this next wall?
All right.
Now, are these all created by the same artist, Scott?
These are all created by the same artist. Let's see where I could possibly stand.
Stand right up here, but right by the edge of this.
These are works by Laurel Case, who lives in Minneapolis, and I'm from Minneapolis, by the way. And Laurel Case has diabetes, and its condition on the eye is called diabetic retinopathy.
Okay.
And it is a leading cause of blindness in this country. But however, for this artist, she still, to this day, has very, very good sight, but she's a candidate for blindness, and it could happen rapidly. So these are very intense and autobiographical explorations of Laurel Case's feelings, and some of the titles are very revealing and speak of her sensation of vulnerability, and also speaks directly to identity problems and light adaptation problems.
All right, the strong light that we have coming back behind this figure, would that be the type of visual image that this artist would expect to see as her vision decreases? Strong lights and darks?
No, it's representing a problem she has at this time. If there were someone, if she were looking at someone else standing there, that she wouldn't be able to identify that figure because of the strong backlighting situation.
The title of this is I Face the Problems of Life, I Gain Strength.
Yes.
And I think that's probably a title that applies to everyone.
Well,
with or without visual impairments.
It truly does.
Okay, let's walk along here and look at some more of these. This is the same artist.
Same artist, Laurel Case. Can you read that one?
I wear a mask to hide my emotions, but I cannot escape. Once again, a very universal.
Well, absolutely.
Kind of.
Many people love these photographs.
Oh, they're
for that
wonderful.
reason.
They're wonderful. I've always found it hard to accept certain things. And control my emotions. Wonderful photographs. Of course, I think photographs ought to be black and white. I'm kind of an old traditionalist.
Well, I am too.
Way.
I prefer the old black and white movie films myself.
Yes. As a child, I played hide and seek. As an adult, I hide my face.
We get very crafty as we get older, don't we?
Yes, we do. And the last one by Laurel here, I've always been afraid of the dark.
And perhaps people's misconception about blindness being darkness. And it was one of my major obstacles. When I was told that I'd be losing my sight, I ran into my own stereotypes about blindness, and one of them was darkness, and another was helplessness. And it took me a long, long time to understand that there are many, many varieties and dimensions of vision impairments, and that's another thing Eye to the Eye is attempting to communicate. There is a blind organization of members out there in the world that does not allow for any distinction between blind or not blind. They would not allow for the term vision impairment. But it is so important that people with vision impairments be encouraged to use what leftover or residual vision they do have for reading large type or for bringing to a museum experience their impression of color or outline. And I have found that for every person with a vision impairment that I have met, they have experienced a different level of visual acuity. And it's needless to say, people with good vision will look at the same object and have different perceptions or different feelings about the colors, for instance.
Right. Wonderful. Okay, now we obviously have a different artist here, Scott.
This is Peter Slayton, who is a painter from New York City. And he also, like myself, has retinitis pigmentosa. It's called RP for short. And Peter Slayton has used a very visual language of American sign to say, see this. But most importantly is this dervish character up in the right-hand corner, who for Peter and for me and for many of the artists in this exhibition are those elements and those individuals out in society who are staring at those of us who are using low vision devices or canes or seeing eye dogs. And sometimes laughing. That dervish is laughing at many of us because sometimes we invariably have this shame issue about not being like other people. It's certainly not our fault, but it's something oftentimes that we have to work through. I know that I've had to work through my shame issues about not hearing as well and not seeing as well as all my peers and friends.
Okay, well, a wonderful painting. And very emotional, very strong statement.
Yes, it is.
We have one more work here in this particular section. Tell us about this one.
This is a work by Girard, a French Cajun who just passed away a month ago. A heart attack, high blood pressure, diabetes. He was a double amputee, and he was just a remarkable graphic illustrator, trained in the Bauhaus tradition until he lost his sight within a period of a year, but found tremendous joy continuing his interest in the arts by working in this tactile medium of clay. This is a bird sculpture, and it is very characteristic of many of his works. And it is true that when forced to use your hands, you learn to use your sense of touch. It becomes reawakened, and he has presents us with fine and very pure forms.
Well, this is a wonderful piece too. I think from the standpoint of it is so tactile. It's a good thing they have this plastic case around it, because I really want to put my hands on it. It really not only encourages you to look at it, but it really does encourage you to feel it.
Well, I'd like to explain that this is one of the rare times when cases have been covering the works. The artist intended that they be touched. The Eye to the Eye mission is that they be touched. But because of this exhibit's very close proximity to the Gaston Chase exhibit here at the Philbrook Museum, it would confuse and compound the problems and the issues here.
See. Sure. Okay, well, let's go down to this section and take a look at some other artists.
Barbara, these are two works by University of Minnesota professor Lou Safer, who is one of the invited artists in Eye to the Eye. And what's so curious about his icons, he calls them, round icons, is that they're very similar to the photographs that an ophthalmologist will take of the back of the eye. They're called fundus photos. But Lou Safer had some concerns reaching into his 60s and toward his 70s that he was having things happening. He was noticing things, and consulted with his ophthalmologist, and so presented these two stylized paintings of those everyday vision phenomena that many of us experience. And so what we have here are the various colors that sometimes we can detect inside our eyes. There are some vertical lines that are of outside reflective lights, But there is a lot of debris floating around in here, and that talks about the floaters that we all experience, little wispy tides of dust that are always evading our gaze, and against certain light-colored walls we can see and chase around and be entertained by. The other painting here, the other icon is of phosphine activity, electrochemical things that happen, I believe, in the brain and seem to present themselves like on the screen of our eyes. And they are like white neon lights. Sometimes people see grid patterns, and sometimes it happens when we're feeling faint or if you should get up out of a chair too rapidly. And many people love these works because they begin to say, yes, I have those all the time, and oh, when I press my palms to my eyes, I see all these beautiful lights, and it gets people really interested in the kinds of visual experiences that are available to them, and it gets them to pay attention to them and to enjoy them more.
I thought I was the only person that those things happened to.
Interesting, sure. Should we go over here?
Yes,
now?
let's go over here. We have some more photographs to look at.
We're looking now at a whole series of works by photographer Flo Fox, who lives in New York City.
Okay.
And she was born blind in one eye. And then later in her life, because of multiple sclerosis, it took a lot of the sight in that one good eye, so that she's legally blind. She's standing at 2200, which is not bad. I mean, I have the experience of 2900 when I take my contact lenses out. And what she begins to communicate with us is quite fascinating. These two images here are her attempt to gain that three-dimensional experience that comes with having two eyes or binocular vision. She used the Nimslo photo process here. It's an old-fashioned camera with two aperture openings.
Okay.
And then here she used a corrugated panel to paste strips of photographic images so that there's some sensation of movement as you would walk around and buy the work of art.
All right, I can, yes, as I walk past this, the image totally changes.
So it goes from a monotone gray, and as you walk around, you see a seated lady, perhaps a performer in Soho or something. This is very characteristic of Flo Fox's work. She's a reportage type photographer, and it's characterized by the strong black frame around and always a caption there. Reflecting Perry Street is what this one says. And you can win the meaning of this if you turn the image upside down, and you'll see that it's the reflection of a building in a rain puddle on a street. It begins to talk a little bit about the fragmentation, the sharded characteristics of your visual acuity if your retina is not complete and responding to visual stimuli. And curiously then, these works here are subtitled, If You Could See Like I See. There are three pair of photographs, and the left-hand side images are pretty much the way those of us with normal sight are going to see things. And on the right-hand side, like she sees. Now, she's been able to take advantage of the graininess in the developing process and in the photographic paper to communicate to us that things are not blurry to her, as we would first think. If we took off our glasses, we would say, oh, I wouldn't be able to identify any shapes. It's just blurry to me. But she's beginning to communicate to us that she has acquired these skills over time to discern the meaning of texture. I mean, it's not blur, but it becomes texture to her. And because there are so many varieties and levels and gradients of texture and different hues of texture, that she's able to get a lot more information out of her environment and through her eyes than we would think.
Well, that really is exactly what I would have thought, that vision impaired people, the primary difference would be they would see things blurry, and that it would not be a textural or contrast problem, which she's been able to tell us in these photographs. So it's been certainly a learning experience for me, just in this one set of photographs. Now we have other works.
We have other works, and we can go into the other gallery at this time. Barbara, I would like to show you these two works. First, this one, perhaps the most oxymoronic of all the works in the exhibition. This artist, Monaco, from Morristown, New Jersey, was taught this painting and drawing technique after having lost all his sight to glaucoma in his late teen years. So here you have a blind visual artist working in the visual arts mediums. And what's so curious is about the technique that he brings to the making of this. So if you can imagine, he's using high quality drawing paper, flat on foam board. He uses tactile reference points, pins. He'll put a pin in up here and another pin down here, and he'll lay down a yardstick, straight ruler, and then draw lines there with a colored pencil. And then he'll move those pins and draw another line, and another line, and using different colors. And then he'll stop and he'll cut out an organic looking shape, and he'll hold that down, and he will draw with crayon or colored pencil off from that, or he will stick it on there and continue drawing the lines, and he'll pull the stencil off. And it's after many, many hours, if not weeks, sometimes months of tremendous visual recall that he is able to complete this kind of work. Here's the other one over here. People question, why is it you can do this? Why do this if you can't see what you've done when it's all over with? But Chris will smile and assure us that it's really the zen of doing, and it's the process, it's the journey that is most significant to him, and he doesn't need to know what the thing looks like or what its effect is. Certainly he gets a very positive response from people. What's so curious about the works is that they appear to be so deep, sometimes 6, 7, 8 inches in depth. So he has a remarkable time summoning up visual memories in the creative process, and it's very kinesthetic too, because he's moving his hands and his arms around. He listens to music at the time, and it's not just a novelty for him, but it's his lifeblood, and it's very important to him that he have this means of essentially opening the floodgates of visual memory from those days when he could see.
Well, they're really spectacular. Well, we could change from something that's two-dimensional to something that's three-dimensional here.
Here, you go that way, Barbara.
Okay, I'll go this way, Scott.
This is a remarkable piece in that it is exploring the artist issue of the identity. Who am I? Am I an artist? Or am I an artist with a disability? Am I a blind artist? So this Harlequin by Patrick Farley, who has retrolental fibroplasia, had too much oxygen as a child, baby in an incubator, can really only count fingers at arm's length, and so he's able to do this fine, detailed work like Edgar Degas was very, very nearsighted and blind in one eye, and could do very refined close-up work. And so Harlequin is wearing a mask and holding a mask as well, and this is the impression of the artist's face. Now I'd like to show you the Oklahoma artist that's in Out of the Eye.
All right. As we walk through the gallery here, we can really get a nice feel for the depth of this show, Scott, and the variety between the three-dimensional works, the twos, the black and white, and the color. Okay, this Don Pearson.
This is Don Pearson. He lives in Norman, Oklahoma. And you look at Don's works, and there's really no indication of Don having a vision impairment. He just came out of the closet just temporarily, but for a moment, to share his works with Out of the Eye. Otherwise, he's back doing mainstream art. Some of the artists in the exhibit are literally painting as they see the world around them, and it comes on looking like French Impressionist work. It's very beautiful. But Don Pearson's is most notable because of the influence of his impairment on his work methodology. He has had to change how he does his work. Now, he has retinitis pigmentosa like me, and as you remember, light sensitivity is one of those characteristics. And yet we're night blind, so that we need illumination in order to do this work. However, for Don, as it would be for me now, very fatiguing to begin a project on 100% white cotton paper.
All right.
The light reflecting off that paper into the eyes is very fatiguing. So he got the mind to take the broadside of chalk gray chalk and to tone down the glare bouncing off the paper then.
Okay.
And then he takes an eraser and begins to draw the image and replaces the erased areas with color. And so, intriguingly, through this interplay of positive and negative and giving and taking, he arrives at these most beautiful images.
Well, these are certainly lovely. Does he do commercial artwork as well as a fine artist?
He's primarily a fine artist.
Primarily a fine artist, okay.
But you will find his works in many, many places in Oklahoma. He's a very well-known artist here.
Okay, wonderful. And it's so nice that we have an Oklahoma artist in this exhibit.
It is. Can I show you the vase that he did?
Yes.
What's interesting about the vase is that he had a friend make the vase.
All right.
But remember, I was talking about the problems with glare that we have. As many of you may know, when you're working with glazing materials on a fired pot, everything is flat and matte, and he thoroughly, I mean, it was a discovery for him. He really enjoyed the painting process. He could work at it for much longer periods of time without that kind of fatigue response to glare. But then after the piece was fired and came out of the kiln and cooled down, it was more difficult for him to look at because light was reflecting off his surfaces. But all the same, just fine artistry. He's a wonderful artist.
Well, he certainly is, and of course, I love the way the design is fit on that particular piece of ceramics.
Oh, they do, and this is called Baboon Babies.
Okay, well,
and there are lots of insects in here, and it's just a remarkable thing to watch people looking for all the surprises they're in.
Last week, the artist that I had as a guest was talking about the fact that in his paintings, he liked to have things that you'd see at a distance, and then when you get right up close to them, there'd be little surprise things.
That's right.
That would be exciting for the eye to see, and this is certainly one of those pieces. Well, Scott, we just have about half a minute. Let's take a look at one more work before we leave.
Okay, how about one of my favorites over here? This is by Texas artist Robert Travis, who prefers to paint without his glasses on.
Okay.
And his is the experience that many of us would have when taking our glasses off, and we would almost be convinced that the world is a better place to live in without our glasses on.
Okay, well, that's certainly one way to look at it. Beautiful use of color in this. Well, Scott, we appreciate your being with us so much. This is a wonderful exhibit, and you've given us just a tremendous amount of information. I certainly appreciate your being here.
Well, thank you, Barbara, for having me.
And we'll look forward to having you back in Tulsa again.
All right.
For those of you at home, we appreciate your being with us, as always, for Focus on Art.